And we'll have a part 2 on ES6 next week where we go over more features. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. What is ES6? What's the official name of JavaScript? ECMAScript. So ES6 is ECMAScript 6, which came out in 2015. And every year a new ECMAScript version comes out. Right now we're on like 9 or 10 or something, where they come out with additional features for JavaScript, more improvements and additions to the language. ECMAScript 6 was seen as like the new standard because of the features that came out. So whenever you see a job posting this like can write modern JavaScript, we're talking ES6 most of the time, with maybe some features handpicked from 7, 8, 9, and 10, but 6 is the big one. So features that came out in this version were things like Const and Let, arrow functions, and string template literals. So those are the 3 that we'll go over today. There's quite a few. There's about 15 or so features that came out. We'll cover about 10 of them in total. Let's see here. Cool. Const and Let. What are they used for? New ways to declare variables. Not to like point anyone out. Is anyone still using var? That's cool. No more using var. From today on, Const and Let only. Because no one wants to see var anymore. We will go over the why. I'll make sure you have sufficient why to support my claim of needing to use Const and Let. So we've been using var. var is great. var has always been the way. But it didn't give us as much control as we wanted when declaring variables. So instead, we use Const and Let. What is const short for? Constant. So what is something that should never change? Real world. A name, yeah, I mean, you can change a name, but maybe for the sake of our program, we can't. So this is something we don't want to be able to change, so we declare it as a constant. Console.log name. We'll just run this here. We get Steve. Now, what if I tried to make name equal to Joe? What is going to happen? It will. Assignment to a constant variable error. It's giving us this pre-built control. We won't override ourselves. Now, if this was var, would it throw the same error? No, it's going to let you do that to whatever you want. So there's one good thing. We get more rigidity in our variable declarations. We can choose what can change and what can't change. So what's something that can change that we would declare with let?
A variable name.
Or a piece of data, like we use name, yeah, something numerical, like an age. Starts off as 10, but you grow older every year, it needs to be able to change. So I can say age plus plus, console.log age, and see that it has let me increment it, much like var. So let is closer to var than const is. But whenever you're using const and let, you always, as a good rule of thumb, always start with const. Always. Even if you're in a for loop and you're like, am I redeclaring this constant variable and causing an issue? No, each iteration's a new scoping. So you can use const just fine inside of a for loop, no issues.
When do we want to use
If it starts screaming at you. It's like you've overwritten a constant, you're like, this shouldn't be a constant. The most typical times you'll see it is a number, a counter, something like that. If you're doing a for loop, it better be let I equals 0, because if it's const I equals 0, you can't do the I plus plus at the end. So we'll use let there. But I always, and you should always start with const. If you're using a function, you're declaring a function, we have function declarations and function expressions. Just remind me, what is a function declaration? What's the syntax? Hash function. Starts with the word function. What's the difference? How would we declare the same function but as an expression?
that sum equals?
Const sum equals a function that takes an A and a B. They're called the same way, two different ways to declare it. So if you're declaring a function expression, it should always be const, because we typically don't override our functions. We write our functions for a purpose. We don't want that function to disappear accidentally in the middle of our program. So const on that.
I'm sorry, can you say the best time when you use either or again?
So I always use const. Oh, as far as the two types of functions?
Declaration over expression.
Declarations are kind of the standard, because in JavaScript they're hoisted, they're globally available, meaning I can call this function up here and it's going to work just fine. But this function I can only call after the declaration. That's the big difference between an expression and a declaration. Declarations exist on the entire document regardless of where they're declared. Expressions only exist as of the line number of which they were declared. If I try to call this one here, I'd get a reference error. Sum is not defined.
That could cost a lot of time.
Sure, yeah. You know, program breaking bugs.
So the majority of the time, just stick with the declaration.
Yeah, and you can use const, right, for function expressions to declare functions, but a lot of people in the industry like that function keyword. It's a nice landmark. I know I'm looking at a function, where this one, we'll get into arrow functions in a moment. There is no function keyword to let you know it's a function. You have to look a little closer at it. So function declarations are very, very nice, but it's up to the person writing it. This would work the same way as this, so depending on what you want to do. All right, so more things on const and let though. That's what we're focusing on here. So the first big difference, const is constant, let can change. Var wouldn't allow for that kind of flexibility, so we are X-naying var, but there is more. Scoping. This is still within the context of const and let. Scoping have an E? That doesn't look right. Scoping. What are the two scopes we have by default in JavaScript? Global and local. What is global? Available everywhere. If it's outside of a function, if it's outside of brackets, it is global. So these are global variables. They're not inside of anything. So how do we create a local scope? Even simpler than that, just a function. So if I have my function sum func, I have now created a local scope. The local scope is defined by the function brackets. So general rule of scoping, local can read global, global cannot read local. So if I declare a variable inside of here, const a equals hello, and then I try to console log a outside of this, oh my goodness, what is this going to throw?
Undeclared.
So what kind of error is that?
Isn't that what's called undeclared error or something? Reference error.
Reference error. A is not defined. It follows one of those three errors: syntax, reference, and type.
Can you return it?
Yeah, I could return A. Right. This still doesn't make a global variable. A is still local. What A represented is now being returned from this function. So in order to console log this, I'd have to console log whatever sum func returns when it's called. So now this is going to be called. It's going to return hello. It's going to return hello and console log that. But A still does not exist globally. It still only exists locally in this function. So those are the two types of scopes we had before ES6. ES6 introduced one more scope, and it has to do with const and let. So let's see how this works. In this function, we're going to say if 2 is equal to 2, which is true, I believe. We'll declare a variable. We'll say var a equals hello. And then after the if statement, we will console.log a. And then down here, I'm just going to call the function so we can try this out. Is this print big enough, or do I need to bump it up one more?
So is var declaring it locally if in the function?
Yes, anything declared in a function is local to that function. And var is local scoped, meaning it exists between these two brackets Because we use the var word inside of a function, it only exists here.
But that's what the one did.
Ah, close. What's going to happen when I run this, though? Will that A be console logged on line 21?
Yes.
Yes, it will, because var is local scope. It exists within this entire bracket. However, what if I change this to const? Will it still work? Won't it work?
Oh, okay, I see.
What's going to happen?
So it won't work.
Prove it. Yeah, won't work. Big error. A is not defined.
So it's within the function, it changes the scope.
It's not within the function. What
Because you're
the
still in the function, some function, and because it's not within the brackets from there.
well, it's all about this third type of scoping. So we had global and local, but we've just, when we use Const Let, we introduce a third scoping called bracket scope. Bracket scope is literally the nearest set of brackets is its scope. So it only exists within this if statement because we use const. So A is now undefined because it's not within the same bracket scope of where it was declared. Let is scoped the same way. This will also give us a reference error that A is undefined. So how can I make this work? What if I want A to exist? Then if 2 equals 2, I would like to assign A to be hello, and then console log A so this works. What would I have to change about this function to make this work?
You have to declare A before this.
Yeah, let's tie it to these brackets instead. So we'll declare it within those brackets. We'll say let A. We won't assign it. We don't have to. And then if 2 equals 2, then A equals hello. And now we can console log it, and it works just fine because it exists within this set of bracket scope.
That makes so much more
Sorry.
sense.
Yeah,
What is lexical?
that is bracket scope. So lexical scope is the posh word for bracket scoping. Lexical, like a lexical. So yes, let and const forevermore, no more var. Those are the main differences. One's constant, one lets you change. The other difference is how it's scoped. It is scoped to the nearest set of curly brackets. Yeah. Any other questions on const and let?
Like mutable and immutable.
Fortunately, regardless of the variable declaration, mutable and immutable is a separate concept, where it's more of the data type that you've assigned to the variable. We'll be hitting that hard on Tuesday. So yeah, really, really super important. But fortunately, using let, const, or var, mutable and immutable stay the same. Let me just double check this to make sure we've hit it all as needed. Great. Really good practice for Const Let. If you've been using var in any assignments like Mario Pest Control, go back and change them to Const Let to make your program still work, but with the correct variable declarations. That can be a good exercise to get you used to it. That's all we'll do on it for now. Or we'll keep that going. All right, next bit of information here. Arrow functions. More specifically, fat arrow functions. Why is it called a fat arrow function? Because it looks like a fat arrow. Equal sign, greater than symbol, just like that. That now means function, just like the function keyword, depending on where you use it. So let's take a regular pre-ES6 function like sum that takes 2 numbers and returns their sum. Let's make this a fat arrow function instead. So what again is this? Is this a declaration or an expression? Cool. Arrow functions are never declarations. Can't be, because of the syntax used. So we're going to make sum a fat arrow function, but we have to turn it into a function expression to do that. So I'll say const ES6 sum function. And the difference for this, if this was a regular function, right, we'd have it like that. That's our function expression. This is what you change for an arrow function. You get rid of the function word on the left, and you add an arrow on the right. There's your arrow function. That's it. There's more to it, but that's the basics of it. That's all I have to do to make this work. So let me comment this out and these out because it's going to break. Do I have other sum functions? No, I don't. Great. Just to prove that this still works, we will console log ES6 sum with 10 and 20. We should get 30. There are more rules to arrow functions though. If you are returning a single statement, such as this is one statement, right? I'm just returning one single statement. I actually don't have to say return, and I don't need these brackets either. So I can get rid of this bracket, I can get rid of the return statement, and I can get rid of that bracket. And it will still work the same. So why? Why does it still work the same? Well, the fat arrow, it has an implicit return statement built inside of it. If it doesn't see curly brackets immediately after the arrow, it's like I have to return what's immediately to the right of my arrow. If you put brackets, now I have to tell it to return something. Because I've X-nayed the implicit return from the arrow, I now have to write a literal return statement. Cool? So there's the second rule. We don't need brackets and we don't need return if it's a single statement. Now, if I need to ask an if statement, would I need brackets? Yeah, because that's not a single statement, unless I'm like using a ternary. All right, next rule. Let's say this only took one argument and just returned that argument plus 10. So this is really ES6 plus 10. You know, we're adding 10 to whatever number you give me.
What was the question?
I haven't had a question yet. More of, now there's just one argument, right? Just the letter A, or just the one number. When you only have one argument, these parentheses are also optional. So this is a function that takes one argument and returns that argument plus 10. So this should return 20, or bon for French people. Questions on the arrow function? There's a lot going on there. Yes.
Is it just syntax, the reason they put that in, or shorter?
Yeah, shorter syntax, a little cleaner. And the function keyword in JavaScript has its own this context. The word keyword this really confusing. We'll hit it a couple times until it's not confusing. But functions get their own this. I could console log this, the word this inside of this function, and it would say, hey, you're looking at the global scope. If I console log this inside of an arrow function, it's undefined. So there's no this context with the function keyword.
How's that?
What's that?
How is it useful? Not having this.
If you don't need it, basically. There's a couple times in React where we don't want a this keyword. We want it to bind itself automatically to the global scope. And that's what the arrow does. It says, you don't have your own this. So if they refer to this, it means something outside of here, which will be undefined for this function. Oh, this. Arrows are nice though. One place that you could start using them right away is like a add event listener. So we say we have a, let's say we have a div and we're, what's this? A div and we're adding an event listener to it. What's the first argument of that event listener? Yeah, the event type. So we'll use click, and then we'd have to say function that, right? Well, I don't have to do that. I can say just parentheses, fat arrow, like that. Oop, like that. And this still gets the event object, so we can still do things with the event. Now in this case, there's no reason for the this keyword, so the fat arrow makes sense. It's quicker, it's cleaner. What else can I get stripped off of this that I don't need technically? Yeah, one argument, don't need the parentheses. Yeah, and I guess I'm only doing one thing, so I don't even need the brackets. I can just, this is a worthless event listener that const logs the event. Thank you for nothing. It looks a little different, right? It's just getting used to that syntax.
Now, if you can put like 3 statements in one line, will it still work?
Only if you're using something like a ternary that's still read as a single statement. I can't do something like if event.target.
No, I don't mean like that,
Yeah.
but like when you take something, like you split a string.
Oh yeah,
add onto it.
event dot target dot name dot split dot join. Oh, yeah, I can do all that because it's still one statement. One thing's happening. Yeah. Okay. Anything other with fat arrows? We haven't done any higher order methods yet, right? Like map or filter, reduce. Okay, good. Good. We'll get to that. Let's do one more practice with this. This is a function that takes an array and returns the last element in that array. Okay? Any questions on the function? What it's doing? So what would this function return if I gave it that array? And number 4. Cool. We're going to convert this to an ES6 arrow function. As slim down as we can, piece by piece, starting with random. So I need to declare the same function, but I'm going to do an ES6 function. So how do I declare it?
So you're gonna declare it.
Okay.
So return last element.
Cool.
And then
You can always phone a friend if needed. We believe in lifelines.
it equals.
Now, if this wasn't an ES6 function, what would we writing immediately next? Function keyword. We don't want that, so what's coming next? Anyone have any ideas? Yeah. ARR. What is that? It's an array, but what is this part of the function for? Yep. This is where the parameters are being set up. So we're saying expect an array, just like this one. We could put parentheses around it, but we only have one argument, so we don't need them. And then fat arrow. Yep. All right, and we want to return the last item of that array. So who can close this out for me? How do we return that? Do we need brackets? Yeah?
R and then braces R dot length minus 1.
Cool. Same thing, same function. If I comment this out, we call this, we'll still get, oh, I need to console log it. We will get 4. Now, things that we could add to this that we don't necessarily need, we could put parentheses around this. Those are optional. We could also put brackets around this, but as soon as I do brackets, what does that do to my fat arrow? I have to put return because the brackets cancel out the return statement from the fat arrow.
Why do we have -1?
Array.length minus 1 will always be the last item of an array. So length is always one number greater than the array indexes. Indexing starts at 0, length starts at 1. So array.length minus 1 is really saying array bracket 4 minus 1, which is 3. And the 4 is index 0, 1, 2, 3. So it'll always give you the last item of the array, just like saying that. But now we can give it any sized array, and it will always give us the last element because array.length is a dynamic word. It will depend on the array given. So now we'll get 7. Great. All right, those are arguably the two hardest parts of ES6. Const Let and fat arrow functions. The rest are all little helper tools, so we're just going to slowly go through these little helpers. Starting with one more here, that you've probably already seen. I think we used them today. We will be hitting arrow functions again, I assure you. All right, string template literals. What is concatenation? What data types can concatenation be used on? Arrays and strings. So arrays and strings can be combined by using the process of concatenation. With strings, it's as simple as having 2 strings and then using the plus sign to concatenate. If we wanted a little space in there, we could plus a space. And this will say hello world.
Can you put a number in there though? Num 1, num 2.
Yeah, if these were, yeah, it will coerce into strings. They show up as strings. With arrays, you have to, because strings have the concat method. The way that we did this right here, you could also say console.log string1.concat string2 and have a very similar effect, except it just wouldn't have the space in between. When you're concating arrays, you have to use the concat method. So if I had array 1 and array 2, in order to combine these, I'd have to say array1.concat array2 and get the same combined effect. So concatenation is a topic for arrays and strings, but string template literals, hopefully denoted by the name, are specifically just for strings. It's making this process easier, giving us a third option. We don't have to use the plus sign. We don't have to use concat. We can just write it as a string, but put variables inside of it. So if I want this hello world to work as this third way using string template literals, I can say console.log. And what is the symbol used to define a string template? Backtick. It's right next to the 1 key up in the corner. And if I want to put a variable in my string, what symbols must be used together? $, curly brackets, string 1, and then space, $, curly brackets, string 2, and we get hello world.
Or if you want to put them together, you just not put space.
Yeah. So that's, oops, wrong thing. This space right here is the exact same thing as when I manually put the space in here. Notice 4 or 5 less characters to write just by saying space. It knows to put a space there. So template literals are awesome. I would use them for all strings. Whenever you're trying to add them together, it's easier. It's much easier. You won't lose yourself in plus signs. Yeah.
Does it like resolve it and store it as a string, like if you put it on a variable?
It does. If I like stored this in a variable,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that stores the resulting string, not the literal.
Exactly. Console log phrase, hello world. It's super dynamic. Whatever these are represented as will be put into the string. There we go. And that's really it for string template literals. Remember, they do read white space, so, and tabs and all of that. So this, if I now console logged it, it's out floating in the middle of space. Because it's adding those new lines for me. Yeah. Great.
So if you're using one with multiple